Welcome back to another episode of Right Here in Mass. Joining me today is Brendan Mahan, the host of the ADHD Essentials Podcast, an internationally recognized expert on ADHD/executive function, anxiety, and neurodiverse parenting. As a former teacher, mental health counselor, and principal, Brendan helps families, individuals, schools, and businesses manage the challenges of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anxiety, and neurodiversity. Brendan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have you. And for our listeners, Brendan's very extensive and impressive bio is listed in our show notes. But Brendan, I'd love to start off by giving you the opportunity to share more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm an ADHD coach, consultant, speaker guy, and I and neurodiversity and executive function, and I end up playing with anxiety invariably because that affects everything. Um, and that's what I do. I started off I did the teaching and the mental health stuff that you already mentioned. We can play with that if you want. But I started off when I went sort of fully committed to the ADHD work, right? It was sort of a side gig for a little while. When I fully committed, I started a podcast called ADHD Essentials and work with clients one-on-one and then also run online parent coaching groups. And I've been doing that I think I've been doing it for almost 10 years now. Like it's been maybe 10 or maybe longer than 10. Time gets weird after COVID. Since COVID hit,
Yeah.
stuff doesn't make any sense to me anymore. And I'm old, so it doesn't make sense because of that too. But uh, but yeah, so I've been doing this work for a while, and to me, it's fun, right? If I didn't have to get paid, I would be like, well, let me just do this for free then. Um, because I like helping people and I like sort of supporting them in the ways that they need to be supported.
Mhm.
People ask me kind of how did I get here? And one of my answers to that is I became the person I needed, right? When I was a kid, we didn't have ADHD experts who could guide the kid who has ADHD, or there are parents who have ADHD. And so I sort of became that person for other people once I figured it out for myself. And that's my deal. Yeah, just working with folks who have ADHD, trying to help them in whatever capacity that is, whether it's job stuff or parenting or navigating a marriage that's on the rocks or something. Um, and as well as like friendships and careers and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And now I've moved on to writing a book that comes out September 2026 on a model I have called the Wall of Awful, which is my model for the emotional impact of repeated failure that comes with things like executive function and neurodiversity and those sorts of things. And I train schools and staff, mental health clinicians and businesses and all kinds of stuff to help them better understand neurodiversity so that they can more effectively serve whatever population it is that they need to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious to hear you mentioned that before you went all in on your ADHD coaching and speaking and all of that stuff, that you were a former teacher, mental health counselor, and principal. So, what was that like of transitioning from that career into what you do now? And what was it like to kind of just go throughout that process?
They all kind of combine to form Voltron for what I do now. Like when I taught, I basically was presenting every day, like 4 or 5 times a day to sixth graders in my case.
Mhm.
And when I had to talk to the staff at a staff meeting or something, it was never uncomfortable for me. And it always sort of bewildered me that a teacher would be talking in front of kids all day and then they'd say something in front of the staff and they'd get really anxious. That just wasn't how it worked for me. So the presenting as a teacher, which is all teaching is, it's not really, there's a lot more to it, but there are times when you're in front of the class and you're presenting information. So that part helped me learn how to present. And it also taught me how to provide information in bite-sized pieces, how to use metaphors and condense things down to their essence and that kind of stuff, which has really helped me as a coach, as a person who trains adults in workplaces and that kind of stuff, because I know how to make things make sense that might be hard to understand. And
Mhm.
it certainly is helping with as I write the book and even in the podcast. Um, and so that's sort of the first step. And then when I taught, I had undiagnosed ADHD and schools didn't have a lot of money. So I was bouncing around a lot. A combination of, well, the school's out of money. We're $9 million in debt, which I was in Framingham and that happened to them. And I didn't stick around because they had to let people go. And my performance probably was not up to par because I had undiagnosed ADHD. So I was struggling with like details and that kind of stuff is typically where it gets me.
Mhm.
Um, so I eventually left the classroom and everybody told me I should be a guidance counselor. Anyone I had ever taught with was like, you're so good with the kids. Have such a great connection with the students. You should be a guidance counselor, which made me nervous because I knew I didn't have the most organized structures and systems in the world. And I was like, but that's paperwork. Can't that go south in a hurry if I lose something or forget to check a box or whatever?
Mhm.
Um, but I went back to school. I have a master's in education and I have another one in school counseling. So I went back to get my second master's in counseling to become a guidance counselor, and then found out there aren't that many jobs for guidance counselors. So I wound up working as a mental health clinician for a little while instead. And in doing that job, I think I did it for like 6 months. And what happened was I found out I could really do that job because I had already been coaching for probably a year or two at that point.
Mhm.
And so when I did the mental health stuff, I was like, this isn't that far from coaching. This is pretty easy. And the company I was working for had some red flags that I probably shouldn't mention on a podcast. But that indicated that it just wasn't being run well. The leadership was doing some stuff that wasn't the best decisions.
Mhm.
So when that became clear, I was like, well, I have other choices. I can go somewhere else. And I went and became a special ed teacher in a high school for a little while. Couldn't stay because I'm not licensed to do special ed. So ended up doing the ADHD work. Because I kind of had backed myself into a corner a little bit. Um, and during the course of doing that ADHD work, I consulted with a local Islamic school in my town. It's just a small private Islamic school on like students, and I did some workshops for them and trained their staff and their parents and those sorts of things. And then the principal came up to me one day and was like, "So I'm pregnant." And I was like, "Yep." And she said, "Do you want to take over for me
My
for a little
gosh.
while?" Yeah. So I was like, sure, I can do that. Um, and I think I was supposed to start in like March. And instead I started like that Friday. Like it
Mhm.
was one
Oh
of
my
those, you'll start in
gosh.
like a month or something. Like we had, because she wanted to get ahead of it and like plan,
Yeah.
let's get him going, let's build it up and talk this through and all that stuff. And then her doctor was like, you need to like be on bed rest right now.
Oh
So
my
literally
goodness.
we had that conversation and that Friday I started, even though we were supposed to have like it was between a month and a half of sort of run up and preparation and things. And nope, that Friday I was going. Um, and that role really I really enjoyed it. Like I
Mhm.
really enjoyed the community. I enjoyed the culture. Um, I enjoyed being the random white guy who is the principal of a private Islamic school. Um, and I learned a lot, like and not just about in terms of like how Islamic culture and those sorts of things, but also about leadership. Like I've always
Yeah.
had these theories and ideas of like how leadership should work and what leaders should do. But most of those ideas were like people doing it wrong for me, right? Like me being led poorly. And this was my chance to be in a leadership position and lead the way I thought you should.
Mhm.
And I certainly wasn't doing everything, right? The principal I was working under, I guess, she still did stuff from bed rest, right? She was still figuring out major school events and things, but I was leading the staff. I was in charge of like making sure that students and teachers were doing what they needed to do. And we had at least one teacher who was really struggling. And by the end, the way I worked with her proved to be right. It proved to be the way to do it. And the day I left, she like thanked me in front of the whole staff, saying that talking about her struggles and how hard the year was, and she was coming back next year and felt great about it because of the things that I had done and how I had supported her. And like that's wonderful. That it made me feel great. It made me feel validated for my ideas around leadership, most of which are just, like be respectful and kind to the people who work for you
Yeah.
and take their needs into account and try to support them with their areas of challenge. That's kind of the deal, right? Like that's
Mhm.
what's up. And that proved to be the way to go, as opposed to do this and then zero support, which is a lot of the leaders I've had, a lot of the bosses I've had have been like, do this. And then I'm like, how?
Right.
And they're like, figure it out. You're the professional. That doesn't tell me anything though. That just makes me
Hmm.
feel bad, right? Like that doesn't you're not going to get me to do a better job by making me feel bad. But I had plenty of leaders. I really bosses. In my head, a boss is the one who's like, do this thing or you'll lose your job, right? Like the rule with fear.
Hmm.
And a leader leads. A leader doesn't rule with fear. They can if they have to. That tool's in their toolbox, but they're mostly doing the other things, right? They're like, oh, well, if you don't understand, let me teach, let me guide, let me help
Right.
so that we all get what we need in this situation. And sort of applying that to that job taught me that I was right, that that can work.
Hmm. And with all your extensive experience working in schools, like as a principal for the Islamic school, and then as a teacher
Mhm.
in Framingham and a special ed teacher, it goes to show that like with the work that you do, you don't just like talk the talk, but you walk the walk. Like you've been there in the school
Mhm.
environment. So I imagine that all of that experience is incredibly helpful to the schools that you work with and students because you get it. Like you kind of have both experiences, I'd say, which I think is really great.
Yeah, it is. It's good. And even as I go, right? Like I have identical twin sons who are 16. So I even see stuff as a parent, right? I've
Mhm.
got the lens as a teacher, the lens as a clinician, the lens as a principal, the lens as a parent, and the lens as the guy who sort of comes into schools and talks to them and trains them and helps them figure out the kid that they're struggling with or the overall concept, the initiatives they're trying to get started. And it's useful and it's one of my favorite things. That part of the job is one of the things that I greatly prefer. I kind of like to think that I get paid for the stuff that I don't like about the job and I do the rest of it for free.
Mhm.
So like I don't love sending emails. Email gets overwhelming. I get a lot of emails from people I don't even know. And that part is hard. So I'm like, all right, this is where I'm getting paid, working with a client, training a school staff, doing a podcast, whether it's mine or someone else's. That stuff I would do for free. So I tend to think of that stuff as not the job, it's just the benefits of the job.
Yeah, I like that rephrase actually. That's really good for any business owner to think about too, is like the tedious stuff or the stuff they dread is really what the money's for, but everything else is just passion and fun.
Yeah. I stole it from professional wrestling,
Oh
actually.
wow.
It's one of the things that I like. It's like a hobby. And I don't remember if it was a YouTube video or if I read something somewhere, but it was a professional wrestler who was like, I don't get paid to wrestle. I get paid to travel and be away from my family because that's the stuff I hate. And I was
Mm.
like, that's a great lens. And I just applied it to my job.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing I'm curious to hear about is you mentioned, I think in your adult life is when you were diagnosed with ADHD. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah. In my
curious.
probably my early 30s.
Okay, so if you're comfortable with talking about this, I'm curious to
Sure.
hear what might have led you to that. I actually have a few friends who are in similar boats where, as an adult, they're finally just
Mhm.
finding out that they might have ADHD or ADD, and they're like, "This explains everything that I've been facing and feeling and going through my whole life." So I would just love to hear your experience with that and kind of how you were able to get to that diagnosis.
Yeah. There were hints along the way, right?
Hmm.
Um, my mom, after I got diagnosed, my mom told me that in middle school, the teachers brought it up, but she didn't want to give me the excuse, which was the lens back in the 90s, right? Like that's not
Hmm.
me bad mouthing my mom or anything. It was just the attitude back then. Um, but when I was in college, I ended up like a good ADHD person. I started with one major, moved to a second, and then graduated with a third. So I started as a psych major. And one of the things they say to psych majors is, listen, you're going to hear about various mental health things. You're going to think you have all of them.
Mm.
And that was not my experience. The only one I heard about that I was like, it's probably that one was ADHD, but I blew it off because they were like, you're going to think you have stuff, but you
Yeah.
don't. So I was like, all right, then I guess that's just the rest of them don't ring true or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and that like came up again and again, right? Now I'm a teacher and I'm like, I don't know, that kid, like he's not that far from me. Like the kids that struggle and have ADHD, I get them in a way that other teachers don't, right? So
Hmm.
that makes me wonder. And eventually, towards the end of my teaching career, one of the things that happens when you're a teacher is when a kid is getting diagnosed, they give you this checklist of like ADHD traits, right? And you're like thinking about the kid and checking things off and doing rating scales and these kinds of things. that you then send back to the mental health clinician or psychologist, psychiatrist, whoever that's going to give this diagnosis or not. And I got to the point where I would do the checklist like for the kid on the paper and in my head for me, right?
Yeah.
I'd be like, yep, that one, that one, that one, that one. So by the time I was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years into my 7 year career as a teacher, I was like, I have ADHD. Like I've done these checklists so many times. They completely apply to me.
Mhm.
Um, and one day I was with my primary care physician and I was like, I was struggling at work and I was making mistakes and it was snowballing and I was probably going to lose my job if I didn't fix something. Um, and I just said to him, I was like, I think I have ADHD and I'm wondering like, how do I get medication? What does that look like? How do I do that? And another person I'm not going to name because this is not the best way to go, but he basically said, yeah, well, you're the teacher, so you would know better than I know. Okay, here, right? Like there wasn't a whole
Yeah.
lot of like vetting in that process, and he didn't know how to manage my medication. So I ended up on way too high a dose, which didn't help me. It made me way too anxious and way too cranky, and it didn't like it cost me my career. In the course of me trying to save it, I ended up costing it like a year later or 2 years later, because my meds are too high. Um, but that process of sort of figuring it out and navigating what is ADHD, I sort of diagnosed myself and got away with it. And at the same time, as I sensed that my teaching career was coming to an end, I was like, well, what's next, right? What am I going to do next? And one
Mhm.
option was a guidance counseling job. The other option was ADHD coaching because by then I had heard that that was a thing. I knew it existed. And I had met with a guy, I'd done some work with a clinician who knew ADHD really well and was like, you get this, like you people who are coming off the street and understand ADHD this well, including teachers, they only get it this well because they have it. So like you probably
Mhm.
have it, but also I think this is probably a good career for you because you're really good at explaining it and coming up with solutions and figuring out how to help it. So as I went through that process, I was also learning about strategies, right? I knew some as a teacher, but by then I was sort of picking up some books and reading things, and there wasn't really anything on the internet yet. There was maybe one podcast, maybe two that I had listened to, and a handful of YouTube channels, but it was nothing like it is now. I think I was like the third or fourth ADHD podcast that existed. That's how long ago this is. It's like 10 years ago. And
Mhm.
um, and so that process, I figured it out, right? I was like, okay, and I started teaching myself how to survive with ADHD and learning. Like one of the biggest aha moments, I was way too old when I figured this out. I was way too old when I cracked this particular nut. But at some point in my early 30s, I was like, oh, so organization is like a love letter to future me. That's why people put things away in files and highlight their notes and like put things back in the cabinets the way they're supposed to be. Oh, like forever. I was just like that. Why would I want to file that? It's just a pain in the neck. It's just frustrating to have to put everything away. So I'll leave it out because I'm going to use it again tomorrow or the day after, right? And I'm still not great at putting things away, but at least I understood. Like I had that moment of, oh, just because this is frustrating and a pain in the neck right now doesn't mean I shouldn't do it because a year from now, when I have to find that document, it'll be a lot easier to find because I'll put it where it goes instead of dropping it on a pile somewhere and fingers crossed I ever see it again.
Yeah.
Um, so like those kinds of moments came around as I was getting coming to terms with my own ADHD diagnosis and my own ADHD brain. Um,
Mhm.
and then eventually I got to the point where I was teaching people about it, right? I was like meeting with families and individuals and parents and kids and going, this is what ADHD is and how it works. And let me walk you through it. I can do that in about 2 hours. I
Mhm.
like to say, if you give me 2 hours, you get an A plus job. If you give me an hour, like B minus is kind of the best I can do because it's just really complicated and I need the time.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, which I think is such a good point, and it also hits home to what you just shared, which is that like you became the person that you needed, like in the work that you
Hmm.
do, being able to take everything that you've learned through your own experience and help your clients is incredibly important too. And I also imagine with the work that you do with them, like your experience having ADHD yourself of course gives you a ton of credibility because again, like I mentioned with the school example earlier, you get it because you're going through it yourself. And so being able to tie your personal experiences to the professional work that you're doing with them, of course, makes a really big difference and a big impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't disclose, like, people know I have ADHD because it's all over the internet. But when
Hmm.
I'm working with clients, like, I'm not constantly talking about myself, right? Because if I'm telling a story, I might tell something that is an experience I had. I might also say I've had enough clients now that I'm like, I worked with this other client and this is what we did and this is how it worked.
Hmm.
And then there's all sorts of like research and things that have been done into ADHD, right? At this point, I'm on the organizing committee for the International Conference on ADHD. I'm on the board for the Men's ADHD Support Group. And then locally, I should probably introduce you to Adam. I'm also on the board of directors for an event called ComerCon, which is a sensory sensitive comic book convention, basically,
Oh,
that
cool.
it'll take place in September in Weston. And it's one of the most soul affirming things I do with my year is sort of prepping that, getting it organized, and then going there and doing the work of being there and keeping it going. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's awesome. It's designed for families affected by autism, ADHD, sensory things.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I know you mentioned earlier that you have a model that you've created and it's gone
Mhm.
viral on YouTube. It's led to a book deal. So I'd love to hear more about that model and then also how it led you to this exciting opportunity coming next fall.
Yeah, so I I was t I was talking to a client one day about her kid and their homework, and she was just like, I don't understand why he won't do his homework.
Mhm.
And I said, it's sort of like there's this wall of awful between him and his homework. And my brain split. Like, I kept talking to her, but part of my brain was like, you just said something that is something, and I don't know what it is yet, but that was like really neat, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so over the years, I kind of built it up. And at first, I was like, this is what it is. The wall of awful is the emotional barrier that gets built up through repeated failure. And it
Mhm.
ends up getting in between us and the thing we need to do, right? So it gets in the way when we want to initiate a task or take a risk that's related to something that we failed at fairly often and fairly regularly. We're going to encounter a wall of awful for that task, right? Before we can start that task, we have to navigate this wall of emotions that's between us and whatever that is. Um, and I was at a workshop one day and sort of like shared it with a fellow attendee, going, like, I was learning at the workshop, I wasn't presenting. And she was like, that's great. How do you get past it? And I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing. I thought I was just clever enough for describing it, let alone what do you do? Um, so then I kind of had to figure that out, right? And what I've noticed is that there's 5 ways people try to get past the wall of awful, right? One is they stare at it, which isn't getting you anywhere. You're just like, that's intimidating and overwhelming, and you're frozen and you're not doing anything. The other option is to try to go around it, but that doesn't really work, right? You're like, I'll just go around it, but it's a metaphor and it's infinitely wide. I know because I made it up. You're never going to go around this thing. You're going to end up getting distracted and going off and doing something else. The first way that gets us past it is to smash through it, right? And that's usually I get angry or I get really anxious and I burn these emotions for fuel, right?
Mhm.
So those are really strong negative emotions that we can use to push through the negative these emotional barrier that's mostly more sedentary. The wall of awful is mostly like guilt and shame and rejection and loneliness and feeling inferior and those sorts of things. So anger or anxiety are going to get us through that because they're more active emotions.
Mhm.
The two that get us past it that are healthy, because anger, like smashing, is going to damage my relationship with my friend or my parent or my boss or whatever. When I'm like, fine, I'll do it, shut up, right? Like that doesn't work. Or
Mhm.
if I attack inwardly, if I smash at myself and I'm like, why do you suck? What's wrong with you? You're the worst person ever. Why can't you just do this? That's not great either. Uh, so we're damaging either our relationship with ourselves or with someone else. The two that work are putting a door in it and climbing it, right? So I can put a door in it by changing my emotional state in the moment. That might be listening to music. That might mean I take a quick walk. That might mean I do some exercising. That might mean I go work somewhere else or I work with a partner or a friend. Those things are going to help us shift our emotional state to something that's more healthy and more proactive. Or we can climb it. And climbing it is managing those emotions, right? It's just sort of sitting with those emotions and accepting that they're there Doesn't mean I have to like them. It doesn't mean I want to stay in this situation, but I have to go, yeah, I am intimidated by this thing, or I'm afraid to take this risk, or I'm overwhelmed by the sheer number of emails that I'm facing right now, and I can't seem to figure out which ones matter and which ones don't, right?
Mhm.
So as I sort of manage those emotions, now I'm climbing the wall, right? And what's tricky about climbing it for the outside observer is it might look like I'm not doing anything because I might just be sitting there staring at a computer screen. And
Right.
if mom or dad are there, or my boss or someone or my spouse, they might be like, get to work. But
Hmm.
I am at work. I'm just acclimating to this task that I need to do, whatever that is, right? It's no different than when you wade into the ocean and it's really cold and you're like, this is so terrible and overwhelming. If you keep getting out, it stays cold. But if you go in and just
Right.
sort of accept that it's going to be cold for a little while, right? And you get comfortable with the uncomfortable, to note your sign behind you, like now we're getting somewhere, right? Now we're climbing the wall.
Yeah, that's a great
So
analogy.
thank you. Yeah, that's sort of the wall of awful in a nutshell, right? And
Mhm.
those first three are fight, flight, and freeze, right? Fighting is smashing, flight is going around it, and freeze is just staring at the wall. That's the body's stress response. It's how we typically respond to anxiety and stress if we don't use our cognition to sort of be more deliberate and more mindful and intentional about what our approaches are.
Yeah, very interesting. So, what was it that led you to create a YouTube video about this model? And then, of course, that video led to an exciting book deal.
Yeah, yeah. So I presented that at the ADHD Coaches Organization. Used to have a conference. It has since become the International Conference on ADHD. There were
Mhm.
three different ADHD conferences that merged to become the international one. One of them was this ADHD Coaches Conference. So I went to that, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever, and presented the Wall of Awful because I knew it was a good idea. I was like, this is a cool idea. I'll see if they will accept my proposal. They did. I went, I presented. I walked into that conference and like nobody knew me. I talked to one person because I had read her book and I complimented her book. And then I met another woman who happened to be from Concord, Mass.
Hmm.
And her name is Caroline McGuire. And she's a great friend of mine now, but I sort of like we connected because we're both from Massachusetts. She was an established ADHD person at the time. I was brand new. But I walked into that conference, nobody knew me. I didn't matter. And then I presented and I left the belle of the ball. Like everybody wanted to talk to me. I was immediately on like a YouTube channel, not for this particular video. I talked about like school stuff at that time. But all of a sudden, everybody was like, Brendan, holy cow, like that was amazing. Um, because I had a good idea, right?
Yeah.
And so then a few years later, the conferences had all merged. So I presented the Wall of Awful at the International Conference on ADHD. And I think that might have been the year that they invited me to be on the organizing committee. Might have been the year after. I don't one of the two.
Mm.
Um, I think it was the year after. But I presented at the International Conference on ADHD, and this woman Jessica McCabe, who has a YouTube channel called How to ADHD. That's like the ADHD YouTube channel and has been for a while. If you have friends who know about ADHD, they probably know who she is. Um, if not, they should. And so she invited me to come and present and sort of do a video with her for her YouTube channel. So we did. And there's two of them, one that's like the basic idea, and then another one that goes into how to get past the wall. And that first video has 2 million views on YouTube, which is
Incredible.
insanity, right? It's like it's been up for like 8 years or something, but still 2 million views and the staying power of that, right? Because it like keeps going up and keeps going up.
Yes.
Um, so so that happened. And then from the first presentation 8 years ago, I've had people saying, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? I've had people just assume I've written one. And I'm like, nope,
Honestly,
I
I did
haven't.
assume. I was surprised you didn't see author as part of your title.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost. I'm almost there. Um, and so I was heading like, all right, I got to do this. I'm trying to figure that out and was like, all right, I think I need to buckle down and do it. And then COVID hit.
Mm.
So COVID pulled the rug out from underneath me pretty hard. My kids were in fifth grade. I ended up homeschooling them for all of sixth grade. They had some anxiety stuff. that
Mhm.
hit them. One of them ended up with a pretty severe case of obsessive compulsive disorder. Just to mix the letters up on me, the universe was like, "You get ADHD. Let's give you OCD instead. Make you figure that one out for your kid." This is not a secret. Episode 250 of my show is my whole family sitting on the couch talking about our experience with OCD. So I'm not talking out of school. He's very public about it. He wants to work with folks who have OCD when he gets older.
Mhm.
Um, that's his plan. He kind of wants to be the OCD version of me a little bit,
Cool.
ish. Yeah, I want him to take his own path. He doesn't need to be me. Like, do your thing. My other kid wants to make movies, and I'm like, do that then. Cool. But that's
Mhm.
kind of the OCD kid's way. And so I got burned out. My At the same time that my kids were struggling, and my dad ended up with some pretty significant health concerns. So I was in like sandwich generation land. By the
Mhm.
time all that got wrapped up, and dad was better, and both of my kids were better, I was burnt out.
Yeah.
And trying to put myself back together and rebuild my business that had been slowly dying by inches since COVID had hit. And then I just encountered this woman who was a ghostwriter, and first contacted her for a buddy who needed some ghostwriting help for a client of his. And then I was like, "Can I just ask you about what this is and how it works?" And she's like, "Sure thing." So we talk it out, and it sounds great, and she gives me the price, and I'm like, "That's way more than I can afford." But my dad was like, "I'm going to loan you the money." So cool. So now I'm in this land of like, all right, we're writing this book, right? Like, cool. I have this person helping me. What does that mean? Am I going to self-publish? Am I going to try to get a contract, like a real book deal? What's that all about? And Caroline McGuire, who I already mentioned, who became a friend of mine, was like, "No, we're going to get you a book deal. We're going to figure this out." She helped me get a literary agent, which led to a book deal, right? Like it was
Mhm.
a lot of this is sort of who you know. Half
Right.
of my book proposal is like, I know all these really cool people who will all help me platform this book because I do know a lot of really cool people in the world of ADHD. And so it's a combination of a really good idea, really good writing, because my co-writer Alex Capel, she's amazing. I I taught English when I taught, so like I know how to write, I know how to put a book together. I just don't have time to do that all by myself, right?
Right.
And Alex, I should say, Alex is a ghostwriter. She is not my ghostwriter because her name is going on the cover of the book. It's too important it's important to me that she gets credit for it. And she's also been too important to the book for me not to put her name on the book.
Mhm.
Um, so she's the co-writer. And that's kind of how it worked. It just kind of one thing led to another. I ended up signing with Hachette Publishing, which they're one of the top five publishing companies in the world. I'm in their Balance imprint, and it should come out September 1st, 2026,
My
so that it's
goodness.
kind of ready for, yeah. The We're in the end game right now because it's May while we're recording this. I don't know when it comes out, and it's due in July 1st. Like the rough draft is due. I've learned a lot about how publishing works because it's like you don't just give them the book and then you're done. You do a rough draft and then you clean the rough draft up a whole lot, and then you
Yeah.
give the publisher that draft, and to them that's the rough draft. And then they're like, "Fix this stuff," and they'll send it back to us, and we have to fix their stuff and maybe argue. I don't know, depends on what they ask us to change. And then after that, it finally goes out to publishing. So we need to get it all done. I think they want it finished completely like 9 months before it's going to be released, something
That
like
makes
that.
sense. Yeah.
Um, I've had to find like people that illustrate the book. My friend Danny Donovan, who is an ADHD artist person, is going to be illustrating the book, which is great. I couldn't be any happier than that. Jessica McCabe's writing the foreword. So I'm pretty excited. Like I'm really jazzed about it. And the ADHD community knows about this concept. The wall of awful is a bigger deal than I am. Um, and so I hope that it lands and makes a big splash and helps a lot of people.
What you just shared has reminded me a lot of the butterfly effect, which I've been thinking about a lot lately. And for anyone who hasn't heard of
Mhm.
that, it's basically the idea of like, if you didn't do one thing in your life, think about all the things that came from that one thing that wouldn't have happened. And like you with
Mhm.
submitting that proposal to that conference and talking about the wall of awful, but also like you talking to that woman that just made you randomly say the phrase the wall of awful. Like, imagine if you never spoke with that woman, or imagine if you never
Yeah.
submitted that proposal. Like, think about where you might be right now if that hadn't happened. So I think it's just incredible to think about like those two small things that you did at that time now blew up and like you said helped you to become the belle of the ball and have made such an incredible impact since.
Yeah, and also like I had a conversation with my sister. She was like, "You did this," and I was like, "No, I didn't. I did this with help from a lot of other people. There's a lot of people involved in this." And she was like, "You just take credit, like you did it." And I eventually had to be like, "Okay, cool, I did it," because she was not going to let go. But that's not my mentality. I was like, no, no, like I got a good book deal because Caroline set me up with a good agent, and then my agent was able to get me a really good book deal, and I got a good book deal because I have all these friends who have all these great platforms. I have a good platform too, but more platforms are better, right? And they can all help me support the book once it's coming out. And
Mhm.
also I have a phenomenal writing partner who does has done an amazing job helping me get this book to the place that where it is. Like I am not flying solo on this, right?
Yeah.
And some folks want me to be the guy who's like, it's all me, I'm the only one. And I'm like, and you probably, I imagine you have a similar mentality because of what we're doing right now. Half of my thing is like, I'm a podcast host, and the whole job of my show is to put other people over. It's to make other people look good and get their name out there and help them get the attention that they deserve. I'm
Mhm.
just the vehicle, right? I'm not the kind of guy that needs to have all the attention, that needs to be the center of everything, right? I tend to approach the world as though I am the supporting character in everyone else's story, and that's part of what makes the book a little tricky is like at some point I have to be the main character, and I'm not
Yeah.
super comfortable with that. I have very big main character energy that I've been working to quiet for at least a decade, because I figured it out and I was like, oh, that's not how I want to be. um, but yeah, I hear you on that. Like it's the butterfly effect, and it's also like no one's doing this stuff alone. No one's flying
Right.
solo in life, and we're all helping other people. I do have a fun butterfly effect story though.
Share it. Yeah.
Yeah, this was like a really cool my butterfly effect came back to me one, which was neat. So I was on a panel at PAX Unplugged, which is a board gaming convention. This is I don't know, 3 years ago maybe. Let's say, yeah, probably 3 years ago. Um, Called ADHD and D. So it was a ADHD and Dungeons and Dragons
Oh,
was the
that's
topic of
fun.
the panel, right? Yeah, I've been running Dungeons and Dragons games for like 30 years. 25 back then ish. And so I do this panel and Yahoo. And then my kids, like a week or two later, I during COVID, I had run a Dungeons and Dragons game for them and their friends to kind of keep kids connected and socializing and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And it sort of went through middle school. So it was like sixth grade through eighth grade. We ended it the day after eighth grade finished. Um, and their friend in the group was like, "Hey, are you going to the D&D club at school?" And they were like, "What D&D club?" And they were like, the theater teacher is starting a D&D club." So they're like, "Sure." And they go. And I emailed the teacher. I asked them if it was okay, but I was like, "I can help." But like, if you need help and support to like teach kids how to be dungeon masters, I can do that because that's the hardest job. And he was like, "Yes, please, thank you." And I was like, "Cool. In that case, I should tell you my credentials so you know it's not just 30 years, right?" I was like, "I'm also an ADHD coach, former teacher, executive functioning expert, da 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 da." And I was on this panel at PAX Unplugged, like running an ADHD and D thing just to credential myself. And he goes, "I was at that panel, and that's
Oh my
why I started this
gosh.
club." And I
That's
was like, "That's so
crazy.
cool."
Oh my
Because it
gosh.
was in Philadelphia and we live in Massachusetts. So there's no reason I would expect one to have been there. But she was at it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about like a full circle moment. And like I said, a butterfly effect. If you never spoke at PAX Unplugged on that
Right.
ADHD and D thing, who knows if the club would have been started? That's crazy.
Right. Yeah. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So you have coming up, you have the book deal, and of course you're supporting your clients, of course, throughout this time. But is there anything
Mhm.
else that's exciting that's coming up for you in your business?
The book stuff is all consuming, right?
Yeah.
And it will continue to be until it's out, and then probably continue to be after it's out, I would think. I'm gonna have to 6 months before it releases is when like the media push comes and all that stuff. And I'm
Hmm.
excited for that, but I have no idea what it's going to be because I'm not in charge of it. November is the International Conference on ADHD. We're in Kansas City, Missouri this year, so I'm looking forward to that. Um, and the thing that's kind of professionally that's not the book and not like my podcast and doing working with clients and that kind of stuff. I'm most excited about is Comic-Con. Like I just
Yeah.
that it's September 6th at the Meadowbrook School in Weston. And it's just such a great event, right? Like we've got art, sort of what you would expect at a comic book convention, right? So there's like an artist row, and we don't always have a bunch of people selling comics. Like we have bookstores selling graphic novels and those sorts of things, but there's not. I'm going to be selling comics this year, like because I'm like we just one, I want to sell some of my books, and two, I want to make sure we get them because we didn't really have
Mm,
anybody doing that last year. It's kind of hit or miss as to how well we do that. But the rest of the con is much more like camp almost. So we
nice.
have like Jedi training where we've got martial arts instructors coming and teaching kids how to be Jedi and use like lightsabers and stuff. The first year we did it, I wasn't on organizing yet for the first year. It was 2 years before COVID hit. But there was a guy who was brought his son and he came up to us. He talked to Adam. He talked to me briefly because I was doing consultation work on ADHD.
Mhm.
And he was sharing with me this story and almost in tears that he had a really hard time connecting with his kid because his kid liked all this superhero stuff and he was a sports guy and he was just like, I don't know how to connect to my kid. And now I know how because they went to the Jedi training. And part of the Jedi training was they had like a foam sort of sword thing and they're
Mhm.
throwing balls as laser blasts for the Jedis to block. And he was like, that's baseball. Like I can play
Yeah.
baseball with my kid now. And I like all of a sudden I get how to connect with him.
Mhm.
And so like that's the magic of Comic-Con is it's helping parents connect to their kids. It's helping kids feel seen and validated. We have young adults that come and are playing board games together and are like trading Pokemon cards and that kind of stuff. It's just this great community event that happens every August or September, depending on sort of scheduling. Um, but it's such a great event. And the first year we went, I met Adam at the guy who runs it, Adam Wilson. I'll connect you to him because
Yeah,
you
I'd
should
love
have him
to
on.
be.
He can do a lot more justice to it than I can. Uh, but I met him at a special needs convention. Like it was in we were just sort of sharing our. I was like, I do ADHD. He was like, I do this Comic-Con thing. And I found out what he was doing and was like, could I sell books at your place? And he was like, yeah. And then I was like, wait a minute, because he had someone cancel. And I was like, wait, could I do ADHD there? Could I sort of do this, like support my ADHD stuff? And he's so sure thing. So my table was half comic books and half ADHD. And I had a line the whole time. Like all these
That's
parents were
amazing.
like, what do I do? How do you help me? Because what he didn't have at the time was professional resources. He was just doing
Mhm.
comic book convention for special needs families and hadn't thought I should give the parents stuff. It was mostly aimed at the kids. So after that, it became like bring in the professional resources, and that's my role on the board is like I kind of bring people in. Um, so we've got like the Baker Center and the Parent Professional Advocacy League. We have big organizations within Massachusetts that do special education work. McLean Hospital came last year, so it's not just a comic book convention for the kids. It's also sort of a piece of it is a resource fair for parents to help them figure out
Right.
like how do I financially navigate these incredible challenges. We have an organization called My Ombudsman that was with us last year. Hopefully they come back again. That helps folks figure out how to manage the financial side of it. And I'm there going, if your kid's got ADHD, you need help cracking a nut with a parenting challenge, just talk to me, right? And we're all there at our tables to answer whatever questions people have. And it's one of my favorite things to do every year is just let's have a whole bunch of people come by and ask me questions and I get to support them for nothing. They don't have to pay me. That's why I'm there.
Right.
So yeah, it's really a great event.
I love that. And it's clear the passion that you have for it with being able to be on the board of it and help with it and everything like that. And I love that you gave a shout out to it too. And so I'm curious to hear what your other favorite local organizations or businesses are to support close to you.
Yeah, so I the number one event or the number one organization that I would shout out, it's very Shrewsbury specific, which is where I live. But it's American Concepts Martial Arts, which is this dojo in the center of Shrewsbury. We teach Kempo, which is a martial art. And I've been with Phil, my sensei, Master Phil, for like 17 years, I think. I'm
Wow.
the longest ranking brown belt in the dojo because I took some
Good
time
for
off to
you.
start a business and get a master's degree. Yeah, I test for black belt in December, finally. Um, so like if that's something that's interesting and you're in the neighborhood of Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, it's just a great place to go and be. The community there is fantastic. It's not expensive. I think he's had the same prices. I know he's had the same prices for the last decade and a half that I've been there. And it was cheap when I started, so it's even cheaper now. I also my family and I like the Omi Grill in White City in Shrewsbury. It's just like a hot pot Korean barbecue place that we've recently
Yum.
discovered. It opened a little while ago. Yeah, it's fantastic. Um, I am obviously a geek if I've been running D&D for 20 years and support a comic book convention, but that's entertainment, and the Hall of Comics are two comic book stores out this way. That's entertainment, and it's in Worcester, and the Hall of Comics is on Route 9. I think it's in Westboro. I think it's Westboro, but it's on Route 9, out this way. And then like the Birch Tree Bread Company in Worcester is good. It's sort of like a coffee shop baking place. Um, those are kind of the off the top of my head, the places that I would happily give a shout out to.
I love it. Brendan, this has been a really great episode, and I've really appreciated having you come on the show and share everything that you've been doing in your business throughout the last 10 years. And now I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to reach out and connect.
Yeah, everything is ADHD Essentials. So ADHD
Perfect.
ESSENTIALS.com for the website. So ADHDessentials.com. You can also do the wallofawful.com. That'll take you there too. And ADHD Essentials on like Twitter and Blue Sky and Instagram and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. The only place it's not ADHD Essentials is LinkedIn, where it's Brendan Mahan. Other than that, it's ADHD Essentials. People can email me at brendan at ADHDessentials.com if they have a question for some reason, or they want to do a workshop or something. Yeah, it's pretty consistent branding. I don't know what I'm going to do when the book comes out because I'm gonna have to push the wall of awful more than I am right now.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I have a link to all those places in the show notes so our listeners can easily click through and connect from there. But thank you so much again for coming on today's show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun.